Greetings and welcome to episode number 16 of Yellowstone Ghost Stories, The Pirate of Yellowstone Lake. Certain spirits are doomed to remain on Earth eternally, some because they refuse to accept their fact that they are dead, and others because they will not give up something important and of value to them. The story of Ella C. Waters' cursed and loathsome old soul is a story of the latter. There is a considerable amount of material on E.C. Waters in the Yellowstone National Park Library, which documents his dishonest dealings and exposes him as a disgusting, stingy old coot who, because of his selfishness, may never leave his earthly haunting. Whatever slimy rock waters crawled out from under is not known for sure, but folks believe him to be from Wisconsin. There is also talk that he was booted out of the Union Army shortly after the Civil War ended. Somehow, though, he ended up 22 years later in Montana. Most everyone who knew him called him a no-good pirate. Some hated him, some feared him, and most considered him insane. We don't know exactly when Waters became associated with the park. Records show him causing trouble as early as 1886. He liked bullying people, and he was a man of very little moral character, bouncing from one job to another. No one wanted him because no one trusted him, but he was like a bad penny, always around the impossible to get rid of it. For a while, Waters served as the manager of the Mammoth Hotel, but the complaints about him were downright scandalous. Patrons and employees talked of how he would often leave at sundown with some poor girl from his staff and then end up spending the night with her somewhere. Finally, Waters was fired after a member of the park association called his mismanagement a disgrace. Waters served briefly as the association's general manager, but was quickly removed by Captain Butelli. Excuse me. The park superintendent. Sorry. For reasons which included the mismanagement of the construction of the Lake Hotel, sadly enough, his dismissal was short-lived as Captain Butelli was soon transferred to another post. With Butelli gone, Waters was again free to seize opportunities. This time he managed to confiscate the position of president of Yellowstone Boat Company. In addition, he obtained a lease for the land he needed and somehow seemed to operate it free from the reins of the Yellowstone Park Association. It seems that what Waters couldn't swindle through lies and deceit, he commandeered with intimidation and harassment. The man was now in a prime position. Although he did not actually own the Yellowstone Lake Boat Company, he was in control. His company did very well at first, for many visitors looked forward to boat trips on Yellowstone Lake between West Thumb and Lake Hotel, a quicker and more comfortable alternative the dusty old coaches called tallyhoos. It seemed that renting rowboats and running a steamboat on the lake would be a lucrative business. So it was. By 1897, the Yellowstone Boat Company somehow ended up belonging to Waters. He had a fleet of rowboats and a passenger boat named Zilla. His business and boats were always in disrepair, but he managed enough capital to keep comfortable himself and his family, which lived in Wisconsin most of the time. He also continued to snare more concession leases. As the turn of the century, however, when most park concessions were somewhat stable, E.C. Waters' Yellowstone Lake Boat Company showed definite signs of sinking. Waters became a more demanding and impossible to deal with in desperation. He raised his already excessive prices. He offered the tally-ho drivers 50 cents a head for every tourist they could lure aboard his Zilla. He brazenly charged each passenger one fare to board his boat and another fare to disembark at the other shore. Attempting to keep even more money, he stopped paying the commissions to the tally-ho drivers, and they ended up boycotting him. Old Waters' next attempt to turn a buck was to throw together a makeshift zoo consisting of some buffalo and elk that he placed on Dot Island in Yellowstone Lake. Waters docked at the island en route to the Lake Hotel and charged his passengers admission. However, protests were lodged about the filthy and inhumane way in which the animals were treated. Tourists complained about having to watch starving animals literally fight for potato peelings and other scraps that Waters provided. Finally, after being served with a government order, Waters was forced to release the animals. By this time, Waters was desperate. He stirred up rumors about the railroad monopolizing the park. He cried that the proposed road from West Thumb to Lake was a deliberate act to run him out of business. The never-ending complaints from angry customers were tearing down his business. Many visitors branded him a rogue and found fraud and refused to risk a ride in his old, run-down boat. When news of these circumstances finally reached Washington, it was suggested that Waters was indeed a nuisance and most likely a mental disorder. In 1905, another problem plagued Waters. Word came west that his 18-year-old daughter Anna had taken her own life at the family home in Wisconsin by taking chloroform followed by a dose of carbolic acid. Waters was quick to blame the suicide on the stress caused by the family's pending financial ruin and the many humiliating accusations about him. It's interesting to note that Waters also had a son who took his own life, but we know nothing of where or when that happened. After his daughter's death, Waters suddenly came up with money to buy a new steamboat, which he coincidentally named after himself, the E.C. Waters. It was delivered to the Yellowstone Lake Boat Company, and Waters boasted that the new steamer could easily accommodate many more people, and this was going to finally make him the wealthy man he knew he deserved to be. When park officials only licensed E.C. Waters to carry 125 people, just a few more than the number he already crammed into the Zilla. Waters was infuriated. He refused to operate the steamer and permanently docked it on the east side of Stevenson Island. In his anger to ensure it would never be used by anyone, Waters hacked the boat full of holes. Waters, now a dejected man, ran the Yellowstone Lake Boat Company only 2 more years. By then, he had managed to estrange many of the other concessionaires, park employees, and even his own crew. The beginning of the end had come, and when he offended a congressman from New York, he fell out of grace with Washington for the last time. In 1907, President Roosevelt expelled him from the park, and he was forbidden to return without written permission from the Secretary of the Interior. Waters' boat concession was canceled and given to T.E. Hoffer, who bought him out the following year. Waters spent 3 years in court trying to get back what he felt he had been wrongfully taken from him, but he was unsuccessful. Historical notes point to his returning to his home in Wisconsin. While researching this story a few summers ago, we toured Yellowstone Lake via the scenic cruise out of Bridge Bay. During the tout, we circled Stevenson Island, and the guide pointed out the old rusted EC waters still lying half sunk in a sandy grove. How sad to be built for many, but in actuality to carry no one. We learned that 20 years after the boat was abandoned, the boilers were removed and used in the heating system of the Lake Hotel. The old steamer, rusted and weathered, was eventually burned. After the tour, I shared with our guide the purpose of our visit. He confided that he'd met a grandson of one of Waters' crew who had said that his grandfather said old Waters died in an insane asylum in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. This may be true, but the old pirate spirit has returned to the island. He just couldn't give it up and is still guarding what's left of that old skeleton of a boat. Some have said that if you stand on the shoreline of Yellowstone Lake at dusk and the wind is blowing just right, you can hear old Waters bemoaning his ill fate. Later, towards midnight, you can see a tiny glow of a kindled fire on Stevenson Island, where the Yellowstone pirate tries unsuccessfully to warn his ghostly soul. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you next week with episode number 17, A Grave Story. So until then, have a great, wonderful day, and we'll see you next week for our next edition of Yellowstone Ghost Stories. Bye for now, and take care.